dogs can live with cancer, not dying with cancer. Like we can do so many different things to support them, not necessarily make the cancer go away, but the cancer doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing.
Hey, I'm Dr. Ruth Roberts. I am so delighted to be here today with one of my many favorite people, Sunny Gandara, a certified holistic pet health coach, certified in clinical nutrition as well for pets. Sunny, thanks so much for joining today. You have had a really interesting road to hoe to get here, but I just want to quickly read your bio as well, because the name of your business is Nacho Average Health Coach, Pet Health Coach, but it was inspired by Nacho, your dog who was diagnosed with hemangiosarcoma, which was just devastating, as it is for so many dogs, sadly. And his eventual death made you question everything that you were being told. And when he did pass on, you knew that you had a mission to dedicate your lives to helping pet parents and their dogs' health challenges, be it cancer, liver or kidney disease, or other chronic illnesses. So, like many of us, you've come to the realization that nutrition is the foundation for health, but also incorporating other mind, body factors such as exercise, mental and emotional support, and then other lifestyle choices, and choosing how you respond and react to the environment around you. So much wisdom in those choices. And welcome. I'm so delighted that we're able to get on this show together and talk a little bit about your experience with Nacho and his journey through hemangiosarcoma and the power of real food. Talk a little bit about what happened with Nacho. You got the horrible news at some point, and then what happened?
Yeah, he was only 5.5 years old. And I had always been worried about my dog's health because I had a history of some horrific, tragic things happening with my dog. So I almost felt like I willed it and I beat myself up when I got the diagnosis. Apparently, it happened overnight, it seemed, because I'm a helicopter mom with dogs. I'm trying not to be that. But then all of a sudden, I noticed this bump on his shoulder. And it wasn't movable. It wasn't one of those lumps and bumps that you sometimes see on mastiffs. He was a Cane Corso, pretty big guy. And I just knew instantly this was not good. We went to get a biopsy, and the head doctor said, listen, if it's nothing, I'm just going to have my assistant call you. But if it's something serious, I will call you because I'm actually going away. And when she called me, my heart just sunk. And she said, I'm so sorry to tell you that we found hemangiosarcoma. And I was like, Heman, what? I didn't even know what that was. And what struck me is, as much as I love this doctor and she's helped me so much with my other dogs, it was just that sunken feeling I got when she said, unfortunately, there's nothing I can do, because this type of hemangiosarcoma was not on his spleen. So this is a cancer of the blood, right? But his was subcutaneous in the muscle. Essentially, it could be anywhere in his body. So she said, there's nothing I can do. It's impossible to get clean margins, which I think it is anyway. But then she just said, the only thing I can tell you to do is refer you to the oncologist. And of course, you go to the oncologist, and the only thing they tell you is, if you're not going to do chemo, I guess you can say goodbye to your dog in 2 months. And that was what I was told. And I was just no other option. And something in me, this was my soul dog. I struggle not to even cry. Now it's a year and a half later, right? But I was just like, I am not accepting this. So I went on my own journey of trying to find something. Like, I wasn't necessarily thinking I was going to heal this cancer, but I wasn't accepting that I was going to say goodbye to him in 2 months. So I basically went down the rabbit hole, and I came to mushrooms. And my limited knowledge of mushrooms, I just basically found a brand called Immunity, which is horrifically overpriced.
Yes.
And I
Now
think
that yes.
it's because they have a patent on how they extract the turkey tail, which in itself is, we can talk about that. But at the time I was desperate. So I just paid for it. And then I started seeing, I was so fortunate, I have a holistic veterinarian, and she has another vet that works with her that specialized in acupuncture, and also gave me a combination of Chinese herbs. And honestly, like, if he was thriving 10 months after his diagnosis on this. I hadn't given him anything, no chemotherapy. And I'm not judging those who wish to do that, because it is sometimes that's what I want to do, but it wasn't for me. And unfortunately, he passed away from an unrelated incident where he had to have a blockage removed. And during that process, one of the tumors probably burst and he bled out. It was horrible. He came home with me and he just died 2 hours later. But I'm convinced that if that hadn't happened, he would still be with me today, because he had shown no signs. And it was almost like a miracle. But when he did die, I was like, I really didn't want other pet parents to be in that situation where they're faced at the veterinarian office and saying that there's nothing I can do. You have no other options. And when we hear the cancer word, the C word, it's really scary, right? To most people, it's a curse word in some sense. And most of us, we freeze up and almost get paralyzed when we hear it. And I always sometimes liken it to, people think it's a death sentence, but it doesn't have to be. And I think you were the one of them to said that I think we need to shift our focus from dogs can live with cancer, not dying with cancer. Like, we can do so many different things to support them, not necessarily make the cancer go away, but the cancer doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. So if we shift our focus to what we can do for dogs who get this diagnosis, I think we can take back our power a little bit and know that there are things we can absolutely do to help support our pets with cancer. When I found that was not by coincidence. I was just researching and your ad just came up and I was like, I knew that was what I was supposed to do for the rest of my life. I have a background in wine and I had a very high power job in the wine industry, but I was like, it didn't mean anything now that I had gone through this experience. So I guess that's how you found your purpose. And it's just, cancer is maybe not the most happy-go-lucky thing to focus on, but for me, it makes sense because I really went down the rabbit hole and I did a lot of research on different things and how I can support others naturally, really focus on quality of life, right? That's what it's all about. Why go through, in my opinion, chemotherapy and they're going to suffer just to keep them for another 2 months if they're not going to enjoy that time. So that was how my stand. With so many things, we can also improve the quality of life with these natural holistic methods, which we can talk more about. But yeah, so it's really about giving people hope. And that's not something that I was fortunate to have when I went through my journey with Nacho.
But I think you said something really important. So I do talk a lot about living with cancer, and that was instead of being all in the fear. And I think that exacerbates everything for both you, the pet parent, and the dog or the cat. Because if we're constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop, we miss all of those joyful events that happen along the way. And I think there can be a lot of events. I used to talk to my clients about having a bucket list and doing something on the bucket list every day. And for dogs, that can be super simple. For one of my own dogs, Arnold, it was walking out on the dock over the marsh every day. Yeah, so I think we think of bucket lists as big, big events, but they don't need to be. It's just the small, joyful events every day.
Yes, being present with your dog. And that's something that if you're so focused on trying to fix them, heal and be nervous, and that energy gets onto them, and that is not a fun place to be. And I know it's super hard because obviously we're worried and we're anxious, but I think that's one thing I work with my clients the most is to really work on yourself. Breathe, take a big deep breath and just look at your dog as perfect and whole. That's something I learned in my animal Reiki practice is we tend to be like, oh, you poor thing. And then they feel it. They're like, oh, mommy is sad. So it's really about trying to be present. And like you said, it doesn't have to be big things. It's like going out for a walk and not listening to your iPad or something like that. Just be with your dog. I think that is the biggest gift you can give them. And I think even that will make them healthier in itself.
I agree. And I think and it's good for us too, right? It's like we have to fill every second of the day with something, some activity, instead of just, I think probably 3 or 4 years ago, people started talking about scheduling in time for white space, literally just being. And I think that's if you're in an industry that demands high productivity, it's like we schedule 24/7, and that's not a good quality of life.
No.
So Yeah, and you have the perspective of having lived in a different country where people live instead of living to work, they are working to make their living and
Mm.
then focusing on enjoyment of life otherwise. So
Absolutely.
that may be a useful perspective to bring in too. And I think you do that with your clients because you have that idea that
Yeah.
no, we're supposed to have fun.
Yes, absolutely. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit so the Western approach, the whole approach in Western medicine has been to cure cancer. And I
Mm.
think in oncology, if you really start talking to oncologists on the veterinary side, that's not their goal, but they will go. The old joke about the human oncologists is they're the ones at the funeral who jump in the casket to start an IV line.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely the way it goes on the human side. On
Mm.
the veterinary side, there are folks that are in that mode of thinking, but there's also, strangely, oncologists that take a more integrative approach, like Dr. Kendra Pope.
Mm.
Um, and so, what, in your experience of having lived through this with Nacho, what did you find were the main differences between sort of the Western approach versus the more holistic options that you found?
Yeah, like you said, Western medicine is very focused on like targeting the tumor. Like it's all about the tumor, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy. The single goal is to eradicate the tumor, and the treatment is based on, say, a specific diagnosis. Mine was Nacho's was hemangiosarcoma, could be lymphoma, osteosarcoma, and then that then dictates the type of medication, radiation, chemo, and surgery that your dog will have. And Eastern medicine, on the other hand, and holistic, such as traditional Chinese medicine, which we learn a lot about in your course, it focuses on restoring the body's balance. And it's about the whole body and strengthening the immune system. It's about shifting the focus away from the cancer or the tumor to really look and consider the entire ecosystem and environment of the body and making it as difficult as possible for the cancer to survive. So you will strengthen the immune system and then build up your surroundings. And I meant when you mentioned Dr. Kendra Pope, and I really love her. She says something that cancer can't live in healthy soil. And I think that's what it's all about, right? So holistic care really approaches cancer as a part of an overall system imbalance in the body. So they're not just focused, oh my God, something's wrong with this, we're just going to go here. It's emphasizing the interconnection between not just physical, but also emotional and spiritual well-being. We talked about that, being present with your dog, less stress. And that approach I love because it incorporates not dietary changes, of course, herbs and supplements, stress reduction techniques like meditation, Reiki, acupuncture, and other complementary therapies. So the goal there is to support the body's natural mechanisms while improving overall quality of life. And that's what gives you hope, right? I can do this. Like that's something I can do and all pet parents can do. So you could say that Western, I found medicine was very disease focused while the other is patient focused. So Western it's that sort of standard of care. The Western or conventional treatment, they offer patients the same treatment plan, while in holistic care, you would see those treatment plans be very different from dog to dog, patient to patient. So that's because, and that's something I learned too, and it may have been from Dr. Kendra Pope, that cancer cells are derived from each and everyone's personal body. They don't come from the outside. So they'll be different based on genetics, on gut health, on toxic load, diet, etc. So all those factors contribute to what type of cancer that specific dog has. So each cancer is individual to that patient. And that's what it's all about for us holistic health coaches. We really take time with the patients and we look through every part of their environment, their lifestyle, and then we individualize that plan. So the more we can do that and tailor the cancer treatment to each dog and their specific situation, the higher the chances are for a successful outcome, because that particular custom-made approach will be best for that specific dog. And I found that just lands with me. That just seems right instead of just one thing and you can just do it. It worked for so and so, it must work for your dog. We know that's not true for humans. So why would it be different for dogs, right?
Right on.
Yeah.
And I think that's really critical. So I'm sorry, I've got to kill my camera for 2 seconds
Yeah.
and I'll keep yakking. But that's a really critical thing to think about because more and more people are talking about terrain theory. So meaning that if we make the terrain hospitable to health, then we make it inhospitable to disease or malaise. And
Yeah.
so I think that is something super critical,
Yeah, for
because
sure.
so many people, when they're starting to go down the holistic path, instead of having drugs, therapeutic drugs, or whatever it is, the condition going on, they go out and buy the 27 supplements, and they never look at the fact, or later they might look at the fact that the dog is eating basically the equivalent of Doritos, and how that might impact
Yeah.
of what's going on. So I think that's really so critical. And
Yeah.
and it sounds like you really, for Nacho, you really had to self-direct care. You were not able to find someone to assist you with that.
No, it was even holistic veterinarians sometimes in my area. They will get freaked out with cancer. Oh, no, we got to just do the Western thing. And that's fine. For some, that's the right
Yeah.
choice. So I'm not saying my choice was the right for everybody. So that's what we also go through in consultations is we see what feels right to you. And then maybe we can do an integrative approach, because at the end of the day, it's your dog. You know your dog best. So that's really important. But for me, I had already fed. Nacho was raw fed. Food and nutrition for me, once he got his diagnosis, was the number one tool I utilized, because honestly, without good nutrition, the body doesn't stand a chance to fight against the cancer, because the immune system has to be the number one focus. It's already so compromised and working so hard to keep your dog alive, right? So I was feeding him just whole fresh foods to provide those nutrients and antioxidants and high quality proteins to maintain his muscle mass. And I'm lucky that I live in the country, so I have lots of local and organic farmers where I could track the sourcing of the meat. But don't go too crazy on that. I feel sometimes we are so idealistic that, if it's not organic and grass-fed, then you could just throw your hands up and not even bother. I think it's much more important to give them vegetables than none at all, say, for instance. So I think we need to just look at the bigger picture. And I focused a lot of anti-inflammatory foods, and it was interesting because this was obviously a little bit before I met you and started your program, but I had added garlic, and a lot of people think garlic is toxic to dogs, but garlic was actually a miracle food sometimes for me, I think, because it contains allicin, which is another sulfur compounds. They have anti-cancer effects, and they can inhibit cancer cell growth, and they promote something called apoptosis. I always say that wrong, but it's like a programmed cell. And it prevents the formation of blood vessels that feed tumors. So there's so much, of course, in order to make this effective is to feed a fresh chopped up garlic and not feed them a million garlic cloves, obviously, because more isn't more. It's like little goes a long way, but it just is a really good food to add. And I work with a lot of preventative care in patients. Like even if you don't have a dog with cancer, the best way to treat cancer is to not get it, right? You want to balance the gut microbiome by inhibiting these harmful pathogens and supporting beneficial bacteria. And garlic can be very helpful. So I did that. And then I did a lot of like moderate healthy fats. I limited simple carbohydrates because cancer does prefer glucose, but that doesn't mean I didn't add in complex carbohydrates. A lot of people think, carbs, they can't eat vegetables and legumes and things like that. But that I did add because there's a lot of vitamins and minerals in those foods. So I'm not a huge fan of, even though I know that sometimes it works with the keto diet, but I felt like I wanted to give him some of those anti-inflammatory, antioxidant foods that are present in vegetables and legumes. For me, it worked, and I lightly cooked them just like you do in the crock-pot diet, and then just focusing on that. And I feel like that really supported him. And yes, of course, we can talk about mushrooms. Of course, I love mushrooms and herbs and such. But if you don't have any of that at hand, just go to nutrition. Things like wild-caught fish or fatty fish like sardines for omega-3s and protein, and organ meats or grass-fed beef if you can, free-range turkey, things like that. And then lots of these cancer-fighting vegetables like leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. All those things are in the crock-pot diet, by the way. So when I got yours, I felt, wow, this is someone I really can connect with, because I don't see a lot of people with that approach, but that is what feels right to me. And he was eating it happily. And again, didn't see anything negative from just focusing on diet alone is really great.
Agreed. And I think you can make huge amount of impact just by focusing on how you're feeding and what you're feeding. And so Stephanie's like, garlic's a blood mover. Yes, in traditional Chinese medicine, garlic helps to resolve stagnation, which is the failure of the blood to move. And garlic is toxic in high doses, but you could feed a 50-pound dog an entire clove, so one of the pieces of the head of raw garlic every day with absolutely zero effects. So that's one of the first questions that people ask when they start feeding the crock-pot diet. Oh my God, there's garlic in there. This is toxic for dogs.
Right.
And it's toxic to us too if you eat enough of it. That's the thing. Unless you're in starvation mode, and this has been in humans, this happens when crops are failing and all there is to eat is onions. And so if you eat 10 pounds of onions, yes, you can create Heinz body anemia in yourself. But that's the thing, all of this stuff, with the exception of macadamia nuts and Brazil nuts, it's all dose dependent toxicity, including chocolate, by the way. And there's a lot of evidence, maybe not in the US, but a lot of evidence that raisin toxicity is dose dependent as well. There's actually some evidence in the US it's related to a fungicide that contains fluoride. But so that's the thing. Really, nutrition is always the first step. And you have to balance that with how's the dog's appetite. If the appetite is in the toilet, then you feed what the dog will eat just to keep them eating and keep them happy.
Absolutely.
And it's really interesting. So it's like keto is the sole approach discussed as far as a nutritional approach to controlling cancer. But on the human side, there is something called a methionine restricted diet that's shown or a low methionine diet. So an amino acid. So we're going to go from a little bit lower on the animal source proteins into a little bit of beans, that kind of stuff. But it's also a nutrient that cancer cells need to thrive and grow. And for people, we love our carbs, and so it's easier to keep people on a low methionine diet than it is on a keto diet. So there's a lot of approaches, and I think what you said earlier about dogma, limiting how you feed, is really important, because we're like, oh, it can only be raw because that's the ancestral diet of dogs, and it should only be organic and pasture-fed and yada. And that's great if you can afford it. If you can't afford it, you are still miles ahead of kibble if you add fresh vegetables to the kibble, and better yet, if you start cooking or feeding raw conventional proteins. So I think that is critical, is to release the dogma, if you pardon the pun, and look at what the dog is telling you.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And I just steer away from people who are extreme on either side, because there's really not, cancer is such a complex disease. There's just no way to know everything about it and how it will act in each and every individual. So I think going with your gut and knowing your dog and learning as much as you can, of course, with terms of nutrition. And then, like you said, if the dog doesn't want to eat, there's no point in then throwing a bunch of powder on top of his food too. Like, that's the first and foremost he has to be able to nourish himself somehow. So if that means that you give him something that's not ideal, then, you know, you have to weigh the cons and the pros, right? You want a dog that's happy and he's okay. And that goes for humans too, by the way. We can be like, many of my health coaching, I'm also a health coach for humans. A lot of them are very like orthorexic. Everything is bad. And then they're like the sickest people on the planet because they walk around and so anxious. A little average thinking, I think, and just thinking about it, what's best for the dog at the moment, I think is the way to go. But
right on. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about hemangiosarcoma in specific and some strategies that pet parents could, like if they're out there in the middle of nowhere, or even if you're in the middle of an urban area, but you don't have access to a holistic vet or you're not getting the support you need. What are some strategies you could use to help support your dog with hemangiosarc?
Yeah, so for me, it was really all about supporting him with the immune system with the mushrooms. And so there's different ways you can do that. Obviously, you can order supplements online, but there's also ways to feed it fresh. Mushrooms in general are fantastic not just for hemangiosarcoma, but for anything, any cancer, any immune support. And for those that do choose chemotherapy, they also help reduce the negative effects of chemotherapy, like decreased immune function and things like that. And they just detoxify heavy metals through antioxidant action and immune support, like I said. And these beta-glucans and polysaccharides that are in the mushrooms are really the ones that are the key components in mushrooms, because they enhance the immune system's ability to identify and eliminate toxins. So for me, turkey tail was the number one mushroom. I mentioned the Immunity brand, but of course it's available in many different areas. That's not a culinary mushroom, but you could certainly do things like shiitakes. I love maitakes, and they're all mushrooms are fantastic, right? For turkey tail, I think the key compounds that make that beneficial were the PSP and the PSK, I think
That's right.
Activate the specific immune cells, like the natural killer cells, which I thought was really cool. And I looked into it, right? They help fight the cancer cells. And then you have these things called T helper cells that coordinate immune responses. And then they stimulate production also of beneficial cytokines, which are proteins that help regulate immune function and inflammation. They're also prebiotic, right? So support gut health. So the immune system starts in the gut, right? So it helps beneficial bacteria thrive while inhibiting harmful bacteria. So I mentioned reishi, much of the same that I just mentioned, helps reduce inflammation and also can improve energy levels if your dog is struggling with that or has some fatigue, for instance. The maitake, that's also really wonderful. It is shown, some studies have shown it to help prevent the cancer from metastasizing, which is pretty fantastic. As you can tell, I'm pretty excited about mushrooms, and I've just seen it personally, the effect it had on my dog. That's the first thing I would do. Then, of course, there are herbs and spices also that can help fight inflammation. We can start with things like, everybody knows, like turmeric, right? That has that curcumin in it, which has anti-inflammatory effects and can reduce inflammation markers in the body. It supports liver function, detoxification. It's wonderful. And it is also shown to inhibit cancer cell growth. So I started down the herb path, if you will. I came across Rita Hogan's work, and I'm in her program for canine herbalism. And so I've learned a lot from her. But also I'm in a human herbalist course, and I found that they're very similar in dogs and humans. So you can apply a lot of what works for us to dogs as well. But the point is with holistic care is that you have so much on hand that you don't think of as medicine, right? Like you have these natural herbs that you can grow in your own garden. If you don't have access to fancy supplements, there are things you can do just in your own backyard, right? So there's things like ginger, for instance. So that's another great one. That's an anti-inflammatory and helps with digestive support. If you, for instance, you do have a dog that goes through cancer treatment and has nausea, and it is also shown to inhibit cancer cell growth and reducing like systemic inflammation. And then you have green tea. Everybody can get that, right? So that's these catechins. These are potent antioxidants that can help to neutralize the free radicals. And what I'm sharing now is not specific to hemangiosarcoma, but I find that a lot of the things that I used for him also work for other cancers. So if you're listening and it's not specific hemangiosarcoma, then you can certainly use many of these herbs. But I will say, don't just start giving your dogs a ton of herbs or throwing the kitchen sink at them, because there are a lot of very potent herbs. So you do need to check with your veterinarian. If your dog is on medication, you might make sure there's no contraindication. So just don't do your own medication. You just have to get some sort of support from either a veterinarian or a herbalist, or even us holistic pet health coaches. We can help you along the way as well.
Right on.
And yeah, we talked about one thing that is undervalued, not valued, but underestimated, I should say, is stress, and the fact of stress and what that can impact cancer. And I found that holy basil is a really wonderful herb for supporting the regulation of stress hormones, promoting calmness and emotional balance. And it also has anti-cancer properties as well, and anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. But that's something that if you can get reduces inflammation as well. And
histamine response, actually. Interesting enough. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, of course, linked to all these information things we talk about is linked to cancer progression. We're talking about not necessarily reversing the cancer, but how can we slow the cancer? How can we increase quality of life?
Right on. And that's critical too, because as you said, so many of the things you mentioned were more for general immune support. And what they're doing is helping the immune system do a better job at surveilling the body so that it can see the cancer cells
Yeah.
and actually attack them. So I think that's critical.
Yeah.
The other thing too, so you mentioned early on that hemangiosarcoma is a blood-based tumor.
Yes.
And so one of the risks with this is that the dog something can happen, or just even sleeping, if the tumor gets too big, they can rupture and then the dog can bleed. And
Yeah.
so one of the things that we'll use is Yunnan Baiyao,
Yeah.
which is a Chinese herbal formula that is proprietary. A lot of people have tried to imitate it, but they will not release truly a secret Chinese secret.
Yeah.
Ancient Chinese secret, I should say. But it is very effective to the point where finally emergency room physicians have it on hand, and on both the veterinary side and the human side, because there's a little red emergency pill in there
Yeah.
that helps with an active case of bleeding. So if you have unfortunately received this horrible diagnosis of hemangiosarcoma, this is one of the first things that you want to get. And to me, this is worth, if your dog is not eating well, this is worth actually putting down the hatch if that's possible, because it will help relieve abdominal pain as well. And it does seem to reduce new blood vessel growth to the tumor, which supplies it
I
more
believe
nutrients.
Yeah, I believe that Yunnan Bio, and I apologize for forgetting, that was a very important part of my protocol. I mean, did give that to him, and that was suggested to me by, I don't know if I actually did my own research on that too, but then my vet happened to have it on hand. And that is something that I think that someone told me that the old Chinese fighters used to use it on the field to stop internal bleeding. That's what they would eat. So I was like, wow. So I think that's a really great, thank you for reminding me of that, because that is something I would always keep on hand as well, for sure.
Right on.
Yeah.
And Stephanie's asking, is this the kind of cancer that the PEMF therapies are contraindicated in? And yes, this is, because one of the ways PEMF works is to increase blood flow. And so we don't want to do that.
Yeah.
So that's where if the dog has some rear end issues, you could consider using PEMF for the hips or the knees, but you don't want it around the abdomen or wherever the tumor is located. And that's the thing. Nacho got such a bad deal because it was in the muscle, and that one is
Very
really hard to deal with.
Yeah. And I used acupuncture. So that's something that was very useful for me. And if your dog can handle that, he was luckily very good. And as long as he got tons of treats, he was just laying there. But I found that helps. And acupuncture is something maybe not everybody thinks of, but it's really like a non-invasive, even though there's needles, but it's not really, it's something that everybody can do. And I think it really helps as well with a lot of different conditions, but also with hemangiosarcoma for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a way to use needles to help draw power away from the tumor itself as well. It's been very effective too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Karin says everybody should keep Yunnan Baiyao in their toolbox.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great emergency drug. Thinking back to how you felt and what the process that you went through with Nacho when you received that diagnosis, when you are supporting clients that have either received a diagnosis of cancer for themselves or for their dogs, what do you think is the first most logical step for that person to take?
Breathe.
Yes.
Again, like I was saying earlier, just appreciate your pet. Your pet is perfect. Your pet is there with you, but shifting your focus from thinking that this is a death sentence to thinking and knowing that there are options out there to support your pet. As I was mentioning, I recommend absolutely starting to see what you're feeding your dog, or I say dogs because I work with dogs, but cats too, of course. Stop feeding over-processed foods if you can, where your dog's body has to really work super hard to digest it. And that way, they use up valuable energy that they need to fight the cancer. And if you can, shift to as much whole fresh foods as you can that are supportive of the immune system, anti-inflammatory, and you can give them clean filtered water. Sometimes there's a lot of crap in our water, right? Like heavy metals and toxins. So if you can do that, those are some simple steps that I think most people can do. Then I would look at like your regular yearly protocol of like vaccinations and things. I know that's a hot topic. You're not supposed to vaccinate a sick dog, so you really want to avoid as much of that as possible. I'm sure you can get an exemption from your vet because you're not supposed to do that when they're sick. And then just little steps, don't have to do a ton every time, but just reduce as much environmental stressors as you can, just minimizing exposure to chemicals like cleaning products, lawn treatments, things like that. And just starting with that single supportive supplement. If it's hemangiosarcoma, like I said, turkey tail, adding some warming. I add a mushroom broth for my dogs because that's also another way to get the mushrooms in. So you can purchase dried mushrooms and reconstitute them, chop them up and put them in with some vegetables and pour that over the food even if you have kibble, just to get some moisture in, because they need a lot of that liquid moisture to flush out all the toxins and to get that healthy addition in. And if they're not very hungry, that's another way to get nutrients in. And then of course, I would consider hiring a holistic pet health coach if you need some extra hand holding or someone that really understands and somebody that can devote time, because I love veterinarians and they work so hard. But the problem is, and even my holistic vet who I love to pieces, she just said that to me the other day. She said, I just don't have enough time. I'm overwhelmed. And I wish I could do more. I could help more, but it's not possible. So if you don't want to feel alone, that's why we're here. Just also because, of course, I know firsthand, unfortunately, what it's like to have dogs with cancer. I also had a boxer with lymphoma, so I've gone through it. And unfortunately, 1 out of 2 dogs over the age of 10, I think it's even going to be more now, is going to get cancer. And it's ridiculous. These are not numbers that we should accept. So we have to do something to start reversing. And the biggest thing, if I can just leave you guys with anything today, is don't wait till your dog has cancer. You know what I mean? Because like I said, It's much harder to reverse it than it is to prevent it from happening. So that's really what I am focused on now, is preventative care. And sometimes that's hard to talk to people about because, well, there's no problem. Why should I invest time in it? Later on, when you're paying, like I did, tens of thousands of dollars and you're spending hours at the vet, you might wish you had put in a half hour a day or something, 15 minutes. So that's something to think about, not just for your dog, but for yourself too, for your own health.
Agreed. And I think that's exactly it. It's human nature not to do anything unless there's a fire.
Yeah.
And so that should be our goal, is to prevent the fire from happening, or if it does happen, that it is the smallest fire possible. Because Karin has had the experience with mast cell tumors. And so she's doing everything in her power to support her dogs with known issues. Same thing, you love the big guys, the Mastiffs, the Cane Corsos. They are prone to cancer. And if we know that about the breed that we love, then it is in our best interest for later stress relief and their best interest to actually do everything in our power to minimize the chances of this happening.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, right on. Sunny, thank you so much. If you need to start working with health coaches, because if you've been to the vet 12 times for that ear infection or 6 times for the diarrhea or whatever it is, they can help you patch things up. But Sunny was saying they are so overwhelmed right now that they can't deal with helping you figure out how to prevent these issues from happening, or to help you get to the root cause of why they're happening. So it is absolutely critical that you, as a pet parent, become the best advocate for your dog, for your cat. And one way to do that is to work with somebody that's been trained in how to use nutrition, how to use herbs, and keep this from happening. And that's it. So Karin's been at this for years, but she's got two dogs with mast cell cancer who are in remission with no prescription meds.
Oh, that's amazing.
but she's been working at this for years.
Yeah.
And just like you have, Sonny, you've had that experience that you have this fire burning brightly to make sure that this does not happen again to one of your own dogs, and to
Yeah.
have your clients prevent it from happening to theirs.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. Of course, there's no guarantee, but there's so much we can do. So hopefully you guys leave with that, at least, that you are not helpless. There are ways we can support you.
Amen to that.
Mm.
Cool. Thanks you all for coming today. This has been a lot of fun. So tune in next week. We'll have some more cool stuff going on, and give everybody a big hug. Go outside and turn off your phone for 3 minutes and just chill with them, because
Yes.
they love you. They want you to be out of all of the crazy bubble. Cool.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.